All right. Hello and welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. We are so happy to have you guys here. We are kicking off a brand new series today. But before we get started, my name is Brett Pontecorvo. You might know me from the YouTube channel, Live Keyboardist, or if you've been around for a while, you probably have seen us streaming on Thursdays. We did one on Saturday for Backstage, and we are kicking off a brand new series, which I'm pretty excited about, called Build It with Gig Performer: How to Keep It Simple, Powerful, and Effective. So if you are watching right now, go ahead and let us know that you are here in the chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm coming in from New York City. It's a pretty rainy day. Just finished my second cup of coffee and really pumped because this is the essential stuff, friends. We are taking time today to go through the simple things that over time, when they are compounded, become really powerful. And something that's complicated just for the sake of being complicated is actually not that helpful. But something that is made really out of just powerful, simple building blocks can turn out to be something that is really useful. I see Glenn coming in. Glenn, thank you so much for being here week after week. We're so grateful for you. Furio coming in from Italy. Thank you so much for being here. Happy to have you. Patrick Lee coming in as well. Sunny here. A warm 3C. Love it. Love it. We've got somebody popping in from the UK. So grateful for you. We've also got viewing today David, co-founder, as well as Nemanja, who is one of the wonderful members of the Gig Performer team doing some awesome work. So if you've been following with us for a while, perhaps you checked it out. But on Saturday, we had an awesome interview with Joe Luca on his performing the music of Yes. This is definitely worth watching. So if you get a free moment, you want to check out some clips or just some little tidbits. Awesome Gig Performer setup. This guy switched over from Forte to Gig Performer and kind of shares just like the best things that he's found in switching over from this program. But for today, the reason you guys all are here is to check out simple sounds, layers, and splits. David just asked me for a StreamYard link. It's in your email to pop on. So friends, let's do it. Let's see if I can pop Gig Performer up on the screen here. Let's get into what you came for. So I was chatting with Nemanja a while ago, and we were talking about how it's important sometimes to not overlook the small things, you know? And so that kind of spent us down this whole road with like, what are the things that we need to be able to do right away? And regardless of what level you're at, if you are like a pro Gig Performer user, you've been on the boat for a long time, or you're brand new, I think it's always good to go back and review these concepts because we want to be efficient, we want to be simple, and we want to be powerful. So let's pop over here. So what you see on the screen right now is a blank Gig Performer file. So when you open it up, you'll be prompted for some templates, which are awesome, definitely worth checking out. But this is what you see, right? You are presented with a blank front panel here, no widgets, no sounds. And this is where you kind of start. This is where you build. But when you open this up, or I guess I'll speak for myself, the thing I really want to be able to do is just get a piano sound. That's what I want to be able to do. And Gig Performer takes a very visual approach to everything. Anything that's happening, you're going to be able to see happening. And I think this is key because this really this ties into like the root of how sound manipulation and sound design was started to begin with, right? You had some sort of a sound source. Maybe you are playing trumpet, maybe you're playing guitar, whatever it is, and you're creating that sound, and then you are manipulating it somehow. You are putting a mute on your trumpet, and that trumpet sound is hitting the mute before it hits the listener's ears. Or you've got a guitar and you're running it through your pedal board, and you're manipulating it before it hits your amplifier, before it hits your user's ears. And that's kind of what happens with Gig Performers. So I'm going to show you guys how this is done. We're going to go through a couple of examples, but to start off, right, like what are we looking at? At the top here, this is most of what we're going to need to really begin building. We've got our Rackspaces over here, right? And by default, we've got one Rackspace. We've got edit mode, which allows us to see all of our widgets, which we may or may not get to today. We'll see how time goes. And then we've got wiring view. And this is where I really want to start because this is where the magic happens. When we're building simple sounds, when we're building sounds with splits, when we're building, all of these things that we might want to build, it starts with a blank screen, a MIDI in block, an audio in block, and an audio out block. I didn't have to do anything to get this to show up. I just clicked the wiring view, popped over, and I was presented with this. Now, I'm a piano player, and so that's always the first thing I want to go for. And Gig Performer gives you a bit of a hint here. Gig Performer says, hey, right click or Command P to insert a new plugin. And so what we're going to do is we are going to right mouse click. Now, when we do that, you're going to notice we get a beautiful window here that shows us all of the options that are made available to us. So at the very top, we have internal plugins, and that's going to show us everything that Gig Performer has provided for us to really manipulate our VSTs well. But if we scroll down here under installed plugins, this is where we are going to see the things that we have installed, the VSTs that we have on our computer that we've either purchased or downloaded. And there's a myriad of free VSTs that are available to you if you're looking for some VSTs. And Gig Performer does come with a few, but one of my favorite VST sounds as a piano player is Kontact. So I clicked Kontact, and you'll see that actually brought in this green block, and it says Kontact, and you can see, right, now we have another element to work with. This green block also tells us that this is some sort of a MIDI instrument, and it gives us some information. So at the very top, we can see there's a MIDI input. And then at the bottom here, we can see there are these blue pins, and these tells us here that these are our audio outputs. And there's a MIDI output here as well. But this is not actually going to do much of anything. So we're going to open it up so that we can see what's available to us. I really like all of these pianos, but I'm going to use the Grandeur to start with here. And the Grandeur is loaded, but when I hit keys on my keyboard, nothing happens because we haven't allowed Gig Performer to send MIDI here yet. And this is where we kind of end up on that visual approach thing, right? Where we can really see everything that's happening. So I've got a MIDI in block, and that does what you think it might do. It finds the MIDI that's coming in and allows you to tell Gig Performer where you want to send it. And I'm just going to drag a wire right into that Kontact block. It's so simple, but now I can see MIDI is coming into Gig Performer here and going to Kontact. Now, when I open Kontact, I can see that there's audio happening, but I can't hear it. And that's because I have not yet routed my audio out. So it's done the same way, taking this visual approach where we need to create wires to tell Kontact, hey, where do we want this audio to go? So I'm going to take audio 1 and 2, and I am going to run it to the outputs 1 and 2 of my audio device. Now, right now, I can hear my piano sound, but you cannot. And that's because we're streaming, and so it's a little bit more complicated than that. But all I'm going to do now, Gig Performer actually makes it really easy, is I'm going to send audio the same way I sent audio to my speakers. I'm going to send it to StreamYard on channels 5 and 6. Now, here's a bit of a pro tip. If I drag this over 5 and hold down the Shift key, it will automatically connect in stereo. And now, when I play, I have sound that I can hear, and also I have sound that you can hear. And it's all very clear to see. We have MIDI coming in through the MIDI in block. We have a wire connecting into Kontact, and we have wires coming out to this audio output. And that's a really simple sound. Now, anything that is complex that's going to happen in Gig Performer is going to be some combination of blocks and wires. So we do end up with, if you checked out our stream, setups like Joe Luca's, where you have a lot of blocks and a lot of wires. But when you boil it down, this is how it works. Blocks are connected with wires. We can see everything that we're doing. And it's actually very quick and very easy. Now, most of you are going to want more than one sound. You're going to want more than one thing happening. So Gig Performer, again, all visual, all easy to find. If you check out here at the top left, you'll see where it says Rackspaces, and there's a plus. So if you click that plus right here, it's going to give you two options. Do you want a new Rackspace or a new variation? Now, I feel like this is worthwhile to note. Every Rackspace has at least one variation. A Rackspace really just holds all of your sounds, and your variations hold the settings for those sounds. So I'm going to choose new Rackspace. And for this Rackspace, I'm going to want a different sound. So I'm going to just choose electric piano because that's a pretty common sound that I might use. Now, I'm presented again with the same thing that we started with when I opened up this to begin with. A MIDI in block, audio out, and audio in. So if you're a guitar player and you're watching this, you might be wiring audio from an interface into an effects chain. But I'm still going to stick with this MIDI in block. And I'm going to start this time, right mouse clicking, same way. And I'm going to head down here to Native Instruments where I've got my installed plugins going on, and I'll choose Kontact. We'll double click to open that up and bring this over here so you can see it. I am going to choose my Scarby Vintage keys. Okay, so same like before, we need to wire our MIDI in to Kontact. And we need to wire our MIDI out to our live stream audio or whatever your output is. I use a Mo2 M4 audio interface. It works really well. So whatever you're using, you'll just send the sound where you want to go. Again, very visual. So 1 and 2, this is for me to hear, and that might be sufficient for you. And I'm going to send it to 5 and 6 as well so that you can hear it. And now I have sound. Okay, but we might actually want more than that, right? Like, you know, perhaps you're saying, okay, Brett, like we've created some sounds here, but for me to actually really make use of this, I'm going to need a little bit more. Like what's the juice here? Like what is the next thing? So I think what we should do next is figure out a way, like, you know, when you're playing, you might actually want to have some control over the volume, right? Volume is pretty important. So if we right mouse click here, Gig Performer contains, it comes built in with some internal plugins. And these are things that you can use to really help make your VSTs shine. We've got gain controls, we've got mixers, global processing, MIDI inputs. We won't cover all of these today, but what we are going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to choose a gain and balance control. And that brought in a block, just like everything else, right? We have a MIDI block, we have a VST block, and now we have this gain and balance block. And when I double click on that, what you're going to see is a fader and panning. So the same way we would route anything else, we are going to route this gain and balance. So I'm actually going to disconnect this because this is the fastest way to do it. So I'm right mouse clicking. This is a bit of a pro tip here, but you can click disconnect and it will remove all of the wires. So I'm going to take my MIDI in still to this, and I'm going to run outputs 1 and 2 because that's where Kontact is sending the audio. And I'm going to send that to 1 and 2 so I can hear it. And then I'm going to send it to 5 and 6 so you can hear it. And now when I play, I have control over the volume of this sound. So this could be, in some cases, all you really need to get started. Like if you are just playing maybe 1 or 2 sounds, maybe all you need is this, and it would be really stable. You'd have control over your volume, and you would have control over your sound, whatever sound you wanted to put in there. There's actually a little bit more going on here that I want to talk about briefly. So this MIDI in block here is actually a device within itself. And the reason that it says Omni is because it's actually taking MIDI from every single source that you have plugged in. So I have a little a Kai MPK keyboard plugged in right now, and I also have a Keylab 88 plugged in. So right now, I have one MIDI block, and that MIDI block is actually sending sound from two different places to the same VST. So this works really well if you don't need to separate anything out, but Gig Performer actually does allow you to have MIDI in blocks that are only from one source. So for example, if I wanted to just have my big keyboard, I could come in here, say MIDI input, and just choose my Keylab 88 and wire it in the same way. So I'll disconnect this. And now, actually, let's see if I can pull up a global MIDI monitor here. Okay, so we'll leave that out for now. So now when I play my Keylab, I get sound, but when I play my other keyboard, I get no sound. So that gives us the ability to isolate whatever we want. Now, something that I think really gets overlooked within Gig Performer is that because each of these blocks is really just a snippet or like kind of a tidbit, it has a certain function, it does something very specific. We don't really need to make many duplicates of things. So if we wanted to create a layer, or if we wanted to have, this MIDI in block going to multiple places, it's actually really fast to do. It's insanely quick. So let's check out how that's done. So let's say, for example, you want to have a piano layered with this electric piano. Well, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open up another instance of Kontact, which is now labeled Kontact 1, which is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I'm going to rename this because we want to know like what we're dealing with here. So I'm going to call this the Giant because that is the sound that I'm about to choose. And we'll bring that in. Now, I don't need to create another MIDI in block for this to receive MIDI. Actually, all I need to do is drag in a wire. Now, we won't hear this, but you can see when I play, sound is being created. You're probably hearing the e-piano, but no Giant yet. So what do? Well, we want to wire this, right, so that we can hear what's going on. Now, it's getting a little bit messy here. So this is our pro tip, one of our pro tips. By the way, if you're finding any of this helpful to kind of hear this broken down, make sure you give this video a like. Make sure you share this video. If somebody's new to Gig Performer, you think they might find this helpful, go ahead and share that link. Give us a like so that we know if this is helpful for you guys. But what we're going to do here is we're going to come in and we're going to clean this up. So I am going to right mouse click on Kontact, and I'm going to choose bus layout. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to choose max audio channels. And right now it says 256, so could have a maximum of that. But really, all I want is 2. I just want 2 channels. And watch what happens to that block. Boom. Cleaned up. So much easier to look at. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Max audio channels, 2. Boom. Check it out. Way easier, right? Okay, so I could just wire this, right? I could say, okay, we're going to take the Giant, wire it to the gain and balance. But that presents me with a bit of a problem, right? And the problem is I have control right now over the overall volume, but I do not have control over the volume of each individual sound. So we could create another gain and balance plugin. That would be something that we could do. But Gig Performer actually has some mixers that are included. And those mixers are going to allow us to do this just in a bit more of an efficient way. So when I right mouse click, I get my internal plugins list up at the top of this. And I've got audio mixer for channel. I actually just had a question come in that I want to answer quickly because I think it makes sense to do it now. What are your keystrokes to reduce the contact block size? All right, so check this out. When you right mouse click on the Giant, it gives you max audio channels. And then I can click in here and choose how many channels I want. By the way, if you are watching this and you use a touch device, when you click in here, a keypad appears, and that's so we can easily enter it in. So depending on what number I put here, like, a 9, it's going to adjust it to match whatever number that is, unless the number that you put in the block is greater than the number of outputs it already has. So again, right mouse click, max audio channels, and I'm going to set this to 2 just to clean that up. Okay. Thanks for popping that in, Billy. And yeah, by the way, if you are watching and you have any questions, go ahead and just pop them in because I'd love to answer them while we are here. Okay, so we've got this mixer here, and what I'm going to do is disconnect this for now. Okay, and let's have a look inside our mixer. When I open this up, I've got 2 channels, right? 2 stereo channels, channels 1 and 2, and channels 3 and 4. And I can use this to balance them however I like. So I'm going to run the audio of my ePiano to 1 and 2, and the audio of my Giant to 3 and 4. And now you're going to see audio here, but you're not going to hear it yet because it's not been sent out. And you'll have the ability to control the volume of these individual things to find a balance. What's cool about this, it's something that I missed when I first started using it, is you have the ability to select your output channels. So just like a major ease of use thing here, even though I'm running wires into 2 separate channels, these are both outputting to channels 1 and 2, right? So if I click here on 1 and 2 and run this here so that I can hear, and here so that I can hear, now I have the ability to just hear the Giant or to just hear my ePiano. So we have kind of this ability to mix things in this fashion. Okay, so another thing that we might want to create is a piano string layer. It's something that I do often, and because we've already built a setup that has 2 different sounds, we're actually just going to duplicate this Rackspace. So check this out. If we come over to our Rackspace pool and we right mouse click on electric piano, you're going to see an option to duplicate the selected Rackspace, and it's going to make an exact copy. Now I want to give this a new name. So I'm going to call this piano and strings, and we're going to leave this just as it is. So we'll hit OK. Now I have my ePiano over here and I have my Giant over here. So I'm going to replace my piano, my ePiano rather, with some strings. So let's come in here and find Session Pro Strings. Now there's some kooky things about this particular plugin. So when I pop over here, I want to make sure that my sustain is actually giving me some sustain. And I think that should be okay. So now let's exit out of this. Do we have piano and strings? We do. We've got piano and strings. So as you begin building, it can actually be really fast to start creating new layers. So I've got another question coming in from Billy. Billy, you're asking a great question. So the reason in this case that I duplicated as opposed to creating a variation is because I wanted to use a different sound. If I wanted to use some combination of the sounds already in a Rackspace, then I would have just used a variation. I will touch on variations, but I will not touch on variations today. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. Let me know if that was clear. I duplicated the Rackspace. Let me say it this way. Variations will only control elements that are in the Rackspace itself. They are different versions of the elements you have within the Rackspace variation. If you create a different Rackspace, you can have different ingredients, which is why I created a different one. So let's say we find ourselves in a situation where really what we want to do, I'm going to rename this just so I don't forget what it is, strings. Let's say we find ourselves in a situation where we no longer want one MIDI in block controlling these 2 sounds. Perhaps for some reason we want strings being controlled by one keyboard and piano being controlled by another keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Okay. And I'm going to right mouse click again, going to our internal plugins. Here's the MIDI input, and I'm going to choose Keylab. That's my big keyboard, and I'm going to run that to the giant. And then I'm going to right mouse click again, and I'm going to choose my MPK Mini for the strings. So now what I've done is I've made it so that my piano is controlling my piano sound, and my strings are being controlled by my other mini keyboard. This can be really valuable if you're playing with more than one keyboard and you want to have one sound on one layer. I see this done a lot with piano and organ, where you want to just kind of have easy access to both of those things. Now, in some cases, you might run your MIDI in blocks to 2 channels at a time. That's something that happens. But I think for now, we've got our 2 keyboards set up controlling 2 different sounds. Now, we've done layers. I want to take a moment to talk about keyboard splits. And to talk about keyboard splits effectively, I want to create a bass and piano patch. So we're going to review, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go over to our Rackspaces. And again, I'm going to duplicate this because I already have a setup where actually I'm going to duplicate the electric piano because that is a little bit closer to what I want. So duplicate selected Rackspace. I'm going to double click. And I'm going to rename this to piano and bass. Okay. So when I open this MIDI in block, I'm given a couple of different options. I'm actually given quite a few options. We could do an entire episode just on the MIDI in block, which, by the way, we did do an entire episode just on the MIDI in block. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the cards at the end, and I'll also leave one in the description. But what we have access to here is the keyboard split and velocity, which we'll actually use both of them in this particular patch. But the keyboard split is actually, I kind of like to think of this more as like a zone, because there's only one parameter. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this MIDI in block to set a range of things we want. Now, it could be tempting to think that you cannot do it from the same MIDI device more than once, but you actually can. So let's start by coming in here. We're going to open up Kontact, and we're going to choose the Scarabee bass. I like this one. Okay. So we'll do this, and then this is just a goofy Kontact thing. So here's my bass. You can kind of hear. And there are a couple of things to know about this particular instrument. So if I play really light, I get a muted note, which is not generally what I want if I'm playing the sound live. And the lowest note is actually quite low, but it feels a little awkward on piano. So I actually want my lowest E on the keyboard to be here, just because that's what I'm used to playing. Like, I want the register to come out that I expect. So we can do this using our MIDI in block. I'm going to start by disconnecting this. And I'm going to run this MIDI in block here right into Kontact. I'm also going to rename this bass so I don't forget. Highly recommend taking the time to name your blocks just so you know what you're dealing with. So in this MIDI in block, actually I'll open both up so you can see at the same time. So what I want to happen is I want this E that I'm currently playing on my keyboard to actually still play this note, but be this E, which is actually a preset, which I don't want to hit. So I want to transpose this note up 12 half steps. So I can do that really quickly just by dragging that transpose up. And now my lowest E is playing the note that I want it to play, which is really nice. And you can see it here lighting up, right? So if I go bring this back to 0, then I was getting this E is my lowest one. But when I put this at 12, now I have the lower E still playing the same note. So that's the first thing I want to do. Now, the second thing with this particular split that I think is really important is I want to make it so that I can never get a muted note. So what we can do is we can actually scale the velocity. So I'm going to bring this up. I don't ever want anything below 30 to come through. So now no matter how lightly I play, I'm going to get a sound. Because if I'm playing bass, there's probably drums happening. If there's drums happening, then I don't want to risk not having a long sustained thudding note when there should be one. So the last thing that we want to do is set our range. So we can come over here to our keyboard split. Now, again, I want you to think about this keyboard split, not just as a split, but as a range, because we're also going to use a duplicate MIDI in block from the same instrument to set another range. And that way we can kind of really break our keyboard up actually into as many pieces as we want. So let's check this out. A lot of times I use a chord voicing like this in my right hand, and I do end up playing in the key of B a decent amount. So this F sharp, I still want to be whatever my right hand is playing. So this note here is going to be the highest note I want bass to come out as. So if I click learn and play that note, it's going to automatically make it so that none of the notes above that pitch go through to the MIDI in block. So you can see me hitting notes, but you can see right here, there is no volume coming through on that bass, which is exactly what I want, right? That's what makes this a split. So I can play bass down here, but once I get up here, nothing. Now, we're going to need a separate MIDI in block for the Giant, but it doesn't have to be from a different instrument. It can be from the same instrument. So we'll go here to MIDI input, and I'm going to choose Keylab 88 again. And when I open this up, I can now set a different set of ranges. So connect this. I'll bring this over. Okay, so like I said before, I want this to be a chord that I have access to. But once I play F, I've got bass coming out. So I'm going to set my keyboard split, and thinking about this as a zone that I'm creating, to have my lowest note be F sharp. So I'm going to choose learn. I'm going to hit F sharp. And now anything north of this note will be piano, and anything below it will be bass. So I've got two MIDI in blocks taking MIDI from the same controller, but processing it two different ways so that I can get a keyboard split where I can play both sounds at the same time. So you can have as many of these as you want. You can kind of have an unlimited range. You could even have another MIDI in block controlling the Giant to play a different range. I'm not going to go there. But you can use as many MIDI in blocks as you want to control the same device if that ends up being useful for you. Okay, friends. So we're kind of about to wrap up our first episode on keeping things really simple. So I want to just do a quick call now. If anybody has any questions about what we've covered, feel free to let me know in the comments. While you're here, I want to let you know that next week, Thursday, 11:30, we're going to be talking about variations, and we're going to be talking about widgets. So if you have been wondering, okay, you've made these great sounds, but you're using your mouse for the entire thing, don't worry. Next episode, we are going to figure out how to not use our mouse at all while we're playing live. The thing that I'm about to show you now, actually, though, gives a little bit of a hint. But if you've got any questions about anything so far, MIDI in blocks, wiring, the visual approach, let me know. I've got a question coming in from Patrick Lee that says, will you be covering a little about the audio out setup? My audio out setup, or just audio out setups in general? Let me know and I'll answer you. When do the other views come into play for live? As soon or as late as you want them to. So next week we'll cover widgets, and I think for 90% of anything you're creating, you're going to have probably at least one widget. So the front panel will come into play almost immediately. And if we had unlimited time and we were doing, 2 hours of streaming, I would jump over and we would do widgets and we'd map them and it would be amazing. But I want to kind of leave these in chunks that are easy to digest. So, so they can come into play as soon as you want. And we actually have, all of these resources in the manual on our website. So if you check out gigperformer.com, you can Nemanja, who's actually watching right now, did an amazing job breaking down all the details of this. So feel free to check that out as well. So Patrick, to answer your question as quickly as I can, it's pretty simple. My audio output is just an aggregate device that combines Black Hole and my audio interface. And the only reason I have it is because otherwise you would not be able to hear me on the stream. So that's all. If you want to learn more about aggregate devices, type it into Google and check out I'm sure Mac has a tutorial on it. It's very specific to streaming, or maybe there's also some tutorials on the Gig Performer blog showing how you can use Black Hole to record the audio out of Gig Performer into Logic. But very kind of niche to what we're doing. Okay. Oh, David makes a good point. So additionally, Black Hole is just for Mac, but there is another one called Virtual Cables for Windows users that has the same function. Okay, so I want to show you guys one final tip. Okay, this is key here. So if you open up the preferences in Gig Performer, there is a tab that says Global MIDI. And this is what you can use to easily switch through your Rackspaces without needing your mouse, which is important because nobody wants to be clicking their computer when they are performing live. So I'm actually going to clear these for now because I had them set up, but I want to show you from scratch. So in here, you have access to quite a few different things to open up your tuner, tap tempo. You can look through these, but what I'm after right now is the next and previous Rackspace assignments. So if you click Learn MIDI for selected item, you can, by pressing a button on your controller, choose MIDI controls that will perform this function anywhere inside of Gig Performer. So I'm going to pick a button here for my previous, and I'm going to pick a button here for my next. Now, I happen to know that my MIDI controller will send two messages out. So I have to turn momentary on for both of these in order for it to work. But now when I hit my previous button, I am able to, something interesting happening there. But when I hit my previous button, I am able to move through my selected Rackspaces without actually touching my mouse. So this is a really powerful thing. We don't want to be using our mouse when we are performing live. Okay, friends. So if we have no more questions, we're going to wrap up for today. But again, if you got value out of this video, will you take a moment to click that like button? If you're not currently a subscriber, make sure you click the subscribe button. It really helps us get the word out about Gig Performer. If you haven't already, we have a wonderful online community at the Gig Performer website where you can get all of this information and more from an extremely knowledgeable, wonderful, and generous group of musicians. Friends, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so happy to have you here. We will be back next Thursday where we will be talking about variations and widgets. Thank you guys so much for your time. We will see you very soon.